This is Luna, a 15-pound Maine Coon who rules her little house like a true queen. And this is Talon, a wild Bobcat Kitten who by all rights should be roaming the pine forests and gray rock slopes of Colorado. From the very first moment they met, the regal house cat became the fierce protector and devoted foster mother of this tiny, fragile creature. Watch Luna, her low, instinctive purr full of maternal warmth, as she grooms the wild kitten as if each gentle stroke could wash away the scars within his soul. She wraps her great paws around Talon's small body as he sleeps a living wall of warmth and safety. She isn't just cuddling him, she's teaching him. With patience and tenderness, Luna tempers his wild instincts, showing him how to exist within the human world without losing who he is. But what tragedy brought this wild predator to Luna's doorstep? Stay with us, because what happens next will forever change how you think about the meaning of family. Before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you won't miss any of our unexpected stories. The air in the remote forests of Colorado hung thick and heavy, saturated with the scent of pine resin, damp soil, and something else. Something acrid, sorrowful, seeping through the air like a wound that refused to close. Dr. Adrian Cole, a veterinarian, felt it the moment he opened the door of his old pickup truck. The crunch of dry gravel beneath his boots sounded unnaturally sharp against the oppressive silence pressing in from all sides. He had spent his entire life healing animals, watching them run again, survive again, return to the wild again. Yet there were still calls that could freeze his heart, that could make his faith in human compassion tremble and splinter. And this was one of those calls. He had come under the pretense of a routine checkup for Frank Dorsey's breeding dogs, a convenient cover. Behind the visit, however, was a whispered plea from a worried neighbor, someone who had heard faint, raspy cries in the night and glimpsed in the darkness the reflection of kitten eyes trapped inside crude wooden cages. The property before Dr. Adrian Cole unfolded like a decaying portrait of neglect and quiet cruelty. Sheets of rusted tin leaned crookedly against the trunks of dead pines, glinting dull orange under the weak sunlight. Along the edge of the clearing, a row of wire mesh cages sat haphazardly in the shadows, half hidden among the tangled juniper bushes, remnants of a place long abandoned by compassion. And inside those cages there lay the source of the sorrow. Two female bobcats paced ceaselessly, muscles rippling beneath thick coats of fur taut with fear. Every step they took echoed the muted heartbeat of instincts crushed under confinement. Their eyes, once bright with wild intelligence and fierce pride, had dulled into pale, glassy hollows, where fear and despair blended into one cold, colorless void. In the cramped corner of the cage, where the two mothers were confined together, a tragedy was unfolding. Three tiny bobcat kittens, speckled fur, thin and patchy, their frail bodies trembling, lay curled in a damp pile of straw. They were creatures who should have been nestled safely beneath the warmth of their mothers, not surrounded by the stench of metal rodent droppings and the suffocating fear of captivity. Instead, the floor of the cage was mottled with dark stains of dried blood mingling with the tang of rust and heavy moisture. The suffocating panic of confinement had driven the two mothers into a state of delirious madness, a place where the lines between instinct and nurture, between offspring and threat, had been violently erased. In the chaos, one of the kittens had fallen, its wounds too grave for survival. The remaining two clung desperately to life, suspended by a thread stretched thin over an abyss. The composure that Dr. Adrian Cole had honed over decades shattered in an instant. He knelt beside the cage, his fingers curling around the cold steel, his heart tightening until it felt like a solid knot of pain pressed hard against his chest. One of the bobcat kittens convulsed faintly, its tiny body matted with blood, breathing shallow and uneven like muffled sobs buried deep in its chest. A deep gash ran along its left flank, and one of its hind legs was twisted at such an unnatural angle that Dr. Adrian Cole had to turn away for a moment to steady himself. Beside it, the other kitten trembled, pressed tight against the corner of the cage. Less injured, yet its back bore harsh, ragged claw, marks the raw evidence of a blind frenzy, born of fear and confinement. Dear God, what the hell happened here? Adrian's voice dropped low, his words hissing through clenched teeth thick with anger as he turned toward the disheveled man emerging from a rusted trailer nearby. Frank Dorsey, the breeder, only shrugged a gesture so indifferent, so casually cruel that Adrian's hands clenched into trembling fists. Wildcats, Dorsey said flatly, as if recounting something trivial. Keep 'em caged long enough, they go nuts. Happens all the time. In that instant, anger flared within Adrian like a wildfire devouring all restraint, but he knew he couldn't let it consume him. There was no room left for lectures on ethics, no time for outrage or empty words. Only action remained. He knelt down, fixing his gaze on the smallest bobcat kitten, the one most gravely injured. Its tiny eyes fluttered open, moss-gray irises clouded with pain, yet deep within them flickered a faint light, a silent plea that reached beyond fear itself. "I'm taking this one," Dr. Adrian Cole said, his voice cold and absolute, leaving no space for argument. "He won't survive another hour without immediate medical intervention. Consider this a voluntary surrender, or I can call the sheriff from Colorado Parks and Wildlife right now. Your choice." Frank Dorsey saw in the veterinarian's eyes not just anger, but the quiet authority of a man who had witnessed too much suffering to be afraid anymore. He grunted under his breath, then silently pulled a ring of keys from his pocket and unlocked the rusted padlock with a dry click. Adrian stepped forward, carefully sliding his arms into the cage to lift the tiny broken body. He wrapped it in the worn emergency blanket he always kept behind the seat of his pickup, a habit born of both profession and painful foresight. The small creature stirred faintly in his hands. A fragile sound escaped so soft it was like silk tearing in the dark, a breath caught between agony and surrender. It was the first sound it made and the faintest sign of life. Later, he would name it Talon, to remind himself that even in ruin there are beings born to cling to life with every last ounce of strength. As doctor, Adrian Cole drove away from that desolate place, leaving behind the rust, the stench, the quiet rot of cruelty. He held the warm bundle on the passenger seat, one hand resting gently on its trembling form. He whispered promises he wasn't sure he could keep. "Hang on, little one," he murmured, his voice breaking beneath the growl of the engine. The pickup truck jolted violently as it hit potholes along the rugged dirt road leading out of the forest. "Hang on. You hear me?" he said again, as if sheer repetition could will the fragile creature to listen, to hold on to life. At the end of the pale gravel road, Evelyn Hartman was trimming rose bushes around the wooden porch of their small cabin when Adrian's truck appeared, moving far faster than his usual calm, deliberate pace. She paused, set down her shears on the work table, wiped a smear of soil from her cheek, and looked up. One glance at his face as he stepped out of the truck was enough. Evelyn understood everything. In more than 30 years together, she had seen that look countless times. The calm, determined mask that barely concealed the vast well of compassion beneath. It was the look he wore whenever a life hovered on the edge, when his heart was once again ready to wager everything on a sliver of hope. Dr. Adrian Cole opened the passenger door and stepped out, both hands cradling the small, carefully wrapped bundle, as though the slightest movement might cause it to vanish. "Evelyn," his voice was hoarse, caught in his throat. "We've got a critical case." She didn't ask a single question. She simply nodded, turned, and opened the wooden door to their house, a space that was both home and the field clinic they had built together in the early years of their work. The air inside carried the sharp scent of antiseptic, the chill of steel, and the harsh white glare of fluorescent lights. The familiar atmosphere of countless sleepless nights spent waging quiet battles against time to pull fragile lives back from the brink. On the sterile steel table beneath the blaze of surgical light, Talon's suffering lay completely exposed. His body was terrifyingly small, barely a pound, a trembling bundle of skin, bone, and blood. His spotted fur was matted with grime and dried crimson. The gash along his flank was deeper than Adrian had feared, and the tiny leg was shattered beyond recognition, twisted at an angle that made his chest tighten painfully. For hours, the world seemed to shrink until there was nothing left but the white light above the pounding hearts of two people fighting to keep a fragile spark alive, and the broken, stuttering breath of the small creature lying between them, balanced on the razor's edge between pain and hope. Dr. Adrian Cole worked with the unwavering focus of a seasoned surgeon, each movement so precise it seemed there was no room left for emotion. His large, calloused hands, shaped by years of fieldwork in the wilderness, now moved with startling gentleness as he cleaned each wound, stitched the paper-thin skin, and realigned the matchstick-sized bones of the kitten's shattered hind leg. He fashioned a temporary splint from a tongue depressor and surgical tape, every wrap and stitch made with the intensity of a man who knew that a single mistake could cost a life. Beside him, Evelyn Hartman was his silent, indispensable partner. She prepared saline drips, placed blankets in the warmer, and carefully mixed a high-calorie kitten formula. One they would have to feed drop by drop through a small syringe, so the fragile throat would not choke. Talon was nearly unresponsive. His tiny body hung limp in their hands, heavy like a fragment of a fading soul. His life now flickered like a candle in the wind, and the faintest breath of infection or shock could snuff it out forever. They worked without pause through the afternoon and into the hushed depth of night. Their only companions, the rhythm of their breathing and the steady pulse of surgical light falling upon a silent battle between death and compassion. The only sounds in the room were the faint clink of metal instruments, the steady hum of the incubator, and the quiet, hopeful whispers that filled the spaces between heartbeats in the night. "Come on, little fighter," Evelyn Hartman murmured, her hand trembling slightly as she stroked Talon's head, feeling the fragile warmth that still clung to life beneath her fingertips. "You're safe now. You can rest, sweetheart." By the time dawn touched the window frame, both of them were utterly exhausted, their lab coats streaked with dried blood and antiseptic. But Talon's breathing had steadied, weak yet rhythmic, fragile yet persistent. He had taken a few drops of formula from the syringe, a tiny, miraculous victory that brought a glimmer of hope to the dark circles under Adrian's eyes. They had pulled him back from the edge of death, though both knew the road ahead would be long, unforgiving, and filled with trials. Adrian prepared a small bed for him inside a large dog crate in the living room, surrounding it with warm water bottles and soft fleece freshly dried from the warmer. Bathed in the faint light of morning, Talon was nothing more than a fragile whisper of a being, small, weightless, and lost in the vastness of the human world that had just granted him a second chance at life. And then, as the first rays of morning sunlight streamed through the window and touched the blanket where Talon lay, another member of the household appeared silent, yet with a presence as undeniable as fate itself. Luna, their Maine Coon, was not merely a pet, but the reigning queen of Dr. Adrian Cole and Evelyn Hartman's small home. Weighing nearly 15 pounds with a magnificent plume of a tail and a thick, soft ruff around her neck that looked like a living flame. She moved with deliberate, majestic grace, each step as measured as if accompanied by music only she could hear. In this small, quiet world, Luna was the sovereign, and nothing happened without her silent, discerning gaze. She leapt onto the armchair opposite the heated crate where Talon rested. Her tufted ears stood alert, and her deep green eyes cool as pine forests locked onto the fragile newcomer. She sat perfectly still for nearly an hour, unmoving, observing without blinking. Adrian and Evelyn watched her in silence, scarcely daring to breathe. With her sheer size and regal temperament, a frail bobcat kitten like Talon could easily be seen as a threat, or worse, as prey. Then, after a silence that seemed to stretch for an eternity, Luna flicked her tail. A soft thud echoed as she landed gracefully on the wooden floor. With movements fluid and deliberate like a sacred ritual, she began to approach the crate where a trembling, newly rescued life awaited the judgment of the household queen. Luna lowered her head, pressing her nose gently against the wire mesh, her long whiskers quivering in the still air. From inside, Talon let out a faint, wavering cry, the sound of primal fear from a creature too small to understand what was happening. And then, the miracle happened. A deep, resonant vibration rose from Luna's chest, a low, steady purr that rippled softly across the wooden floor. It was not the usual sound of contentment, but the voice of maternal instinct itself, a wordless lullaby of ancient comfort that no human language could ever name. She lay down gently in front of the crate, her great body forming a living wall of warmth. The purr continued, rhythmic and unbroken, like a second heartbeat filling the room, a calm, steady rhythm that wrapped around the trembling creature. Within whispering, "You are not alone." From that moment on, Luna never left him. She took upon herself a role no one had assigned, becoming the warmth, the heartbeat, and the shield that stood between Talon and the fragile edge of life. The first few weeks that followed were a delicate dance between survival and loss. Adrian and Evelyn continued their tireless round-the-clock care, each dose of medicine, each drop of formula carefully measured and given. But Luna offered a different kind of medicine, one that no syringe or science could deliver: the tenderness, warmth, and compassion of a heart capable of love beyond instinct or species. When Talon grew strong enough to leave the crate for short periods, Luna was always there, a patient, gentle mountain of fur whose very presence seemed to calm the air around him. At first, Talon was nothing more than a trembling bundle of fur guided by raw instinct toward the nearest source of heat, and that place was always Luna's soft, welcoming belly. He burrowed deep into her long, silky fur, his tiny body swallowed whole by the vast embrace of the Maine Coon queen. And Luna, the proud sovereign of the household, lowered her head, eyes half closed, and began to groom him. The rough tongue that had once been a symbol of authority and ownership now moved with startling gentleness, carefully smoothing each tiny spotted hair along Talon's body, lingering longer on the places he could not reach himself. She licked away the grime of his past, and with it seemed to cleanse the lingering shadows of fear and nightmares within him, using the ancient language of care, where love and instinct become one. Each night, Evelyn Hartman would pause at the doorway silently, watching the scene unfold in the living room, her eyes blurring with emotion. Luna lay curled on the fleece blanket, her large paws wrapped protectively around Talon, pulling him close until he rested safely against her, a living, breathing blanket that purred softly through the quiet. That sound, the deep, rhythmic purr rising from Luna's chest, filled the room, blending with Talon's faint breathing, weaving together a symphony of peace and rebirth. Talon, once robbed of his mother's warmth, had now found something far more miraculous than mere survival. A mother of another kind whose love knew no boundaries, where compassion transcended the ancient divide between predator and prey. Time passed, and those fragile days stretched into quiet weeks. The wound along Talon's flank slowly closed, leaving behind a fine pink scar like a thread, and at last the splint on his leg was removed. At first, he remained hesitant, his steps uncertain and trembling, as if afraid the ground itself might betray him. But under Luna's gentle, encouraging gaze and her soft, reassuring purrs, Talon began to step forward to touch the world, and again to explore the house, and to relearn that life could be safe, that love could be real. Then, his wild instincts began to awaken. One morning, as sunlight poured through the window and spread across the carpet, Talon suddenly lunged at Luna's twitching tail. His leaps were still clumsy, his gait slightly uneven, yet within each movement pulsed a rising, untamable energy, the wild spirit of life rekindled, unstoppable by pain or fear. And it was in that very moment that Luna began her second lesson, perhaps the most important of all, because Talon was not a house cat. Hidden within those small paws were claws, sharp as needles, and though his body was still young and slight, his jaws already held surprising strength, a reminder that the blood running through him was not born of domestication but of mountains and shadow. During one of their more spirited play sessions, Talon, overcome by instinct, lunged forward and swiped at Luna's face, tiny claws flashing pure reflex born of the wild. But Luna did not retaliate. Instead, she released a deep, guttural sound, a sharp growl laced with authority. the unmistakable voice of a mother who knew the laws of the wild and enforced them with grace. Talon froze instantly. His ears flattened tight against his head, his body suspended mid-motion excitement, collapsing into fear in the span of a single breath. Luna's gaze held steady, unblinking green and piercing like judgment itself. Then, slowly and deliberately, she raised one paw and tapped him lightly on the nose. A gesture that was both a reprimand and a lesson in restraint, firm, yet filled with calm control and quiet mercy. The message was unmistakable, no words were needed to understand it. That's not how we play. Learn to control your instincts. It was the first lesson in both strength and mercy taught by a queen to a young bobcat just beginning to master his own nature. A growl too fierce from Talon would be met with a soft hiss from Luna, forcing him to lower his tone, turning it into a rough, questioning chirp. A bite too hard would earn him a gentle but firm pin to the floor, not painful but enough to remind him until he relaxed his tense body. She was teaching him the subtle art of feline etiquette, how to temper the wildness just enough to coexist in their shared world. Talon learned to soften his pounces, to keep his deadly claws sheathed, and to turn a predator's snarl into a playful cry. A young bobcat raised by a Maine Coon queen, the result was a creature both beautiful and profoundly paradoxical. Talon grew at an astonishing pace. Before long, he was no longer the tiny creature that could once fit into Dr. Adrian Cole's cupped hands. Beneath his spotted coat, lean muscles began to take shape. His legs grew longer and stronger, and the distinctive tufts of fur on his ears finally appeared. He soon reached half of Luna's size, then 3/4, and before long he was nearly her equal. Their play sessions became whirlwinds of spotted and tabby fur tumbling across the living room rug, filling the air with the chaotic sounds of pure joy. Yet through it all, Luna remained the gentle matriarch, and Talon, the devoted son, never overstepped his bounds. He would still curl up beside her at night, his head tucked beneath her chin, their breathing synchronized in the steady rhythm of a bond that transcended the boundaries of species. Dr. Adrian Cole and Evelyn Hartman watched the bond between them with a mixture of awe and quiet unease. They had saved his life, but it was Luna who had saved his spirit, healing wounds no medicine or surgery could ever touch. They loved Talon with every fiber of their hearts. Yet deep down, they both understood a painful truth: this house could never be his forever home. For no matter how much love raised him, a bobcat would always belong to the wild, to the forest where instinct ran free, and the soul could answer its true call. One Tuesday evening, Evelyn Hartman sat curled on the old sofa, half watching the local news while stitching a patch onto Dr. Adrian Cole's work jeans. Talon dozed at her feet, his body twitching lightly with dream-chasing motions, while Luna sat poised on the mantelpiece, her bright green eyes watching over them all with her characteristic calm. On the television screen, the news anchor was reporting on a recent bust involving animal cruelty. Authorities from the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Department, working with the local sheriff's office, had raided an illegal breeding operation in the foothills. Evelyn's hands froze midair. On the screen appeared the very property where Adrian had first found Talon. The rusted cages, the decaying trailer, the withered pine trunks, everything exactly as it had been that day. The report stated that the breeder had been arrested, and several exotic animals, including 2 adult bobcats and 1 bobcat kitten, had been rescued. "Adrian, come here quickly," Evelyn called, her voice trembling. Dr. Adrian Cole stepped out from the kitchen, still holding a dish towel, drying his damp hands. As his gaze lifted to the screen, his face began to harden. The desolate land, the corroded cages, the collapsed trailer, all far too familiar to mistake for anywhere else. The reporter went on: the surviving bobcat kitten had been transferred to a licensed wildlife sanctuary, where it would receive treatment and rehabilitation before eventually being released back into the wild. Evelyn looked from the television down to Talon, curled peacefully at her feet. Adrian. Just 1 surviving kitten. She hesitated, her voice catching. "Do you think
Adrian,
it could be?"
look at this.
The unfinished question hung heavy in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. "Quite possible," Adrian replied softly, his eyes still fixed on the screen. "The timing matches." The location does too. A wave of conflicting emotions surged within Evelyn Hartman. The fierce, protective love she felt for Talon wrestled with a fragile spark of hope that had just begun to flicker. Perhaps Talon still had family somewhere out there. The love of a conservationist for an animal is always a complicated kind of love. It is not merely affection or attachment, but an unyielding loyalty to the laws of nature, to what is right for the creature itself, even when the human heart longs to hold on. That night, after Talon and Luna had fallen asleep, Adrian and Evelyn sat together at the kitchen table, talking for hours under the dim amber light. Both of them knew they had a duty to uncover the truth. The next morning, Dr. Adrian Cole began making calls. With his long-standing reputation in the fields of veterinary medicine and wildlife conservation, he quickly reached the right people. A colleague from the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Department (CPW) connected him directly with the director of the sanctuary, Dr. Lila Navarro. Dr. Cole recounted the entire story, how he had rescued a dying bobcat kitten from that very property just a few days before the raid took place. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Dr. Lila Navarro spoke, her voice trembling with a mix of surprise and emotion. "Dr. Cole, we've also been treating a bobcat kitten rescued from that site. He was severely malnourished and suffering from infection, but he's pulled through. We've named him Rune. We believed he was the only survivor. My God, this truly is a miracle." The confirmation filled Adrian and Evelyn with a joy laced with profound gravity. Talon's brother was alive, his only remaining family in the entire world, and he was just a 2-hour drive away. And they both knew with a certainty that was equal parts painful and pure what they had to do next. On Sunday morning, the sky was brilliant and cloudless, an autumn day so perfect it felt predestined for the journey ahead. The drive to High Peaks Wildlife Sanctuary unfolded in silence. Talon, unaccustomed to travel, sat in a large carrier on the back seat. Every so often, he let out a short, confused chirp, his ears twitching at the steady hum of the tires against the gravel road. And Luna, breaking her usual homebound nature, insisted on coming along. She sat upright on Evelyn's lap, her tail wrapped neatly around her paws, her bright green eyes fixed on the passing scenery as if she understood the significance of the day better than anyone else. The High Peaks Wildlife Sanctuary was everything the rated breeding compound had never been and never could be. It was a vast stretch of land rolling gently through green aspen-covered hills, where every enclosure was designed as a natural habitat, spacious, open, and seamlessly blended into the wilderness. A place where wounded creatures could learn, once again, what freedom meant. Dr. Lila Navarro greeted them at the gate, her smile warm and her eyes kind. "We're so glad you came," she said sincerely, leading them toward a secluded rehabilitation area beyond a grove of silver birches. "Rune is recovering very well. He's a little shy, but his health has improved tremendously." They decided to let the two brothers meet slowly, naturally. Rune was in a large, secure enclosure filled with logs, rocks, and wild native grasses, a near-perfect replica of a bobcat's natural terrain. He was slightly smaller than Talon, his coat darker, but the resemblance was unmistakable from the way he moved low and fluid to the wary brilliance in his eyes. From the shadow of a small rock cave, Rune watched them, eyes wide and tense, the look of a creature who had learned too early what betrayal felt like. Adrian crouched and unlatched Talon's carrier door. The young bobcat stepped out, his body low to the ground, nose twitching as he sniffed the unfamiliar air. His gaze swept across the enclosure, then locked unblinking on the figure hidden among the stones ahead. For a long, suspended moment, neither of them moved. Only the wind rustled softly through the aspens while the rest of the world seemed to hold its breath. It was a primal conversation spoken in scent, in gaze, in the subtle language of wild creatures, an ancient dialect that humans could only watch from the outside, quietly guessing at its meaning. Then Rune took a cautious step forward. Talon mirrored the movement. They crept toward each other, inch by careful inch, their muscles taut, ready either to flee or to embrace the miracle that was about to unfold. When only a few feet separated them, Talon let out a strange sound, half growl, half soft call, an instinctive question, tentative yet urgent. Evelyn had never heard such a sound before. Rune answered with the exact same sound. It was like a key sliding perfectly into its lock. All caution melted away, replaced by an explosion of pure instinctive recognition, raw, deep, and achingly real. They rushed toward each other, not in anger but in a rush of overwhelming joy. The two brothers pressed their faces together, purring loudly, their bodies intertwining in pure, uncontrollable delight. They nipped and wrestled, rolling over the grass in a flurry of motion, every movement blending into the other like a perfect dance of instinct, fluid, alive, and filled with grace. Two halves of one soul, lost and now found. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. A sob caught in her chest as she leaned against Dr. Adrian Cole, who slipped an arm around her shoulders, his eyes never leaving the scene before them. Even Luna, watching intently from behind the fence, seemed mesmerized by the reunion. She let out a low, tender meow, a sound of acknowledgement, perhaps even quiet pride. Watching Talon and Rune move together so effortlessly, so perfectly matched, Adrian and Evelyn understood that their decision had already been made for them. Their cozy living room, warm with love though it was, could never compare to this. Because human affection, no matter how deep, could never replace the sacred bond of kinship. They spent nearly an hour talking with Dr. Lila Navarro, finalizing every detail. The sanctuary was overjoyed to welcome Talon. Now he and Rune would grow up together in a safe, semi-wild environment, a place where they could relearn the instincts of survival and prepare for the day they might, if fate allowed, return to the wild where they truly belonged. The farewell was one of the hardest moments Evelyn Hartman had ever faced. She knelt down, pressing her face into Talon's soft-spotted fur, imprinting into her memory every breath, every heartbeat, every familiar scent. "Be good, my sweet boy," she whispered, her voice trembling through the shimmer of tears. Dr. Adrian Cole leaned down, scratching behind the tufted ears of the young bobcat one last time. "You've got your brother now," he murmured, his voice thick. "Take care of each other, all right?" As they walked back to the truck, Adrian glanced at his wife. Her face streaked with tears, yet lit by a faint, tender smile. "I bet Luna already misses him," he said quietly, his tone distant, wistful. And in that moment, they both fell silent, carrying with them the image of a small bobcat, a child they had loved enough to learn how to let go. "And you do too, don't you, Evelyn?" Dr. Adrian Cole asked softly, his voice low and full of understanding. She only nodded, unable to speak. The pain of parting with Talon was sharp enough to steal her breath, yet beneath that pain lay a deep, resonant peace, echoing in her heart like a quiet affirmation that they had done the right thing. It was the right thing to do. The truest act of love they could have ever given him. Their lives slowly settled into a new rhythm. But every weekend, without fail, they made the drive to High Peaks. And Luna always came along. She would sit beside the fence of the vast bobcat enclosure, her tail neatly wrapped around her paws, her gaze calm and steady as she watched the life within, where Talon and Rune raced through the wild grass, free, strong, and radiant, as if the pain of the past had never existed. Luna watched as Talon and Rune, now fully grown, powerful, and lithe, stalked imaginary prey through the tall meadow. She watched as the brothers leapt across the climbing frames, their movements so swift and fluid they seemed to vanish into the air. Graceful, precise, and breathtaking, like a dance choreographed by nature itself. She watched as Talon and Rune lay basking side by side in the sunlight, grooming each other with quiet tenderness, just as she once had in those early days with the frail, broken kitten she had raised with all her heart. And each time it happened when Adrian, Evelyn, and Luna stood there together, watching Talon live the life he was born to have, wild, free, and alongside the only family bound to him by blood, a deep, peaceful happiness spread through them all. Luna looked up at Evelyn, her deep green eyes calm and wise, as if they held all the understanding in the world. Then she let out a low, warm purr. It was not the purr of possession, but the sound of a mission completed. the work of a mother, and her son had finally come home.